welcome to Titanic Honour and Glory, bringing history to life where the past is always present. It's such a great pleasure to speak to you all today, and today we're going to be bringing an incredible story of a first-class survivor surviving the sinking of the HMS Titanic, and that is the story of Margaret Wells Baron Swift, a first-class lady, and we're going to take a look at Margaret's story just now. We'll look at where Margaret began her life. And she was actually born in Bath in Steuben County, New York City. She was born on the 30th of September 1865. Her mother was Julia Wells. Her father was Charles Hazen Baron, and she had 4 siblings, and that being 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And she was very proud to attend New York University. And my goodness, there she studied and received a Bachelor and Masters of Law degree at the New York University. Fell absolutely in love with Fred Wells Swift. He was a wonderful man, very caring and a compassionate man. And the two of them were engaged, and the two of them decided that they were going to get married. And around about 1899, the two of them were wed. Sadly, Fred lost his life. He sadly passed away very, very suddenly, actually. And with that, the loss of her dear husband, Fred Wells Swift, she was so distraught. She was absolutely incredibly heartbroken. As she put it at the time, Fred just wasn't her husband. He was her close friend, the love of her life. And it took such a long time for her to get over this. She was completely heartbroken. And so much so that she decided that she would maybe go away, for a few months to try to recuperate after the sudden loss of her husband, who she was really grieving very much. So Margaret began a tour of Europe. She decided to leave America, and she wanted to go over to Paris, especially to take in the City of Light, to do a grand tour of Europe itself. Very popular with the Americans at the time. They would travel by steamships across the Atlantic, and they would land in Europe, and they would start, an incredible journey, and so much sights to behold for the many Americans in Europe at the time. So Margaret actually boarded the Titanic under ticket number 17466. Which in fact cost £25, 18 shillings and 7 pence. She boarded the Titanic with her friends, Dr. Alice Leader, Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Kenyon, and they would have an incredible time on this beautiful ocean liner. So when they actually boarded the Titanic, they would have actually entered a privileged world. Now, this is something that's hard to imagine. So we've got pictures on the screen to show you just now. This is the first-class D-Deck reception room. So you can imagine the cortege of Margaret and her friends actually boarding the Titanic here and coming against this beautiful candelabra on the foyer of the grand staircase. This spacious D-Deck reception room where Wallace Hartley, the band leader, and that of the Heroic Orchestra would play in this area here, entertaining passengers as they come on to the Titanic. And then they would make their way along the D-Deck corridors on their way to their cabins. Now, this is the area where Dr. Leader and Margaret shared a cabin together, first-class cabin D17. As you can see, it's quite grand for a first-class cabin as well. There's one dressing table, it's on lovely beds and carpets, etc. Beautiful enamel walls with a porthole window. And then we can see the grandeur of the first class as well when you look at the grand staircase, the first-class grand staircase. This was the crowning glory of the Titanic. And as we talk about dinner, we're going to get an example of what it would have been like for the party as they sit in the first-class dining room. A steward service that would provide oysters, caviar, lobsters, even ice cream that was made on the Titanic. Nothing was pre-made. It was all made from scratch on this fine, luxurious ocean liner at the time. So Sunday, April 14th, 1912 was really the Titanic's last day at sea. And like many, Margaret would be with her friends, the Kenyons, and also Dr. Leader. They would attend the church service, and Captain Smith would be taking the divine service in the first-class dining room. There they would praise and sing hymns to God, and they would take walks along the promenade deck. And you can imagine just viewing that last sunset, just thinking about their voyage on this incredible ship. And they were only, 2 days away from returning home, and what stories they would tell about what there was, how amazing this ship was, the European holiday. It's sadly, the stories that they would tell would be of the upcoming disaster, as most people remember as the Titanic collided with the iceberg later in the evening. The disaster strikes at 11:40 on Sunday, April 14th, 1912. And here we can see Fred Fleet high up in the crow's nest there with the ship's bell. Officer William Murdoch, he is now in charge of the Titanic as Titanic's captain. Captain E.J. Smith has retired for the night. And then 3 rings come from the lookout, Fred Fleet, onto the bell. And as he shouts dramatically, "Iceberg right ahead," there's a huge scrambling on board the Titanic as the Titanic's officers try to turn the Titanic. But sadly, a hard starboard, full astern, close the watertight doors, and hard to port, she would ultimately sideswipe the iceberg. And sadly, this would then seal the Titanic's fate, that she would then go to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, sadly, on a maiden voyage, a tragedy which is still remembered up until the present day. So now we're going to look at putting women and children into the boats. Now, the captain gave the order as the Titanic was now in a precarious position. The chief designer of the Titanic was on board, that man being Thomas Andrews. Now, Thomas Andrews had sounded the ship with Captain Smith and Bruce Ismay, and they had discovered that the Titanic was now breached in 5 of her compartments, which meant that she was going to sink. So Captain Smith got all the officers together, including the officer here, Second Officer Charles Lightwaller, and they said they were going to put women and children only into the boats and lower them away to safety. Now, this is what was going on, as we can see in the picture, just the image here. Captain Smith was really in shock. He had never experienced anything like this before. This was his last command. This was going to be his retirement after the voyage of the Titanic into New York. And Second Officer Charles Lightwaller, many a time, had to actually go up to the captain and shout to the captain by cupping his hands over his ears because of the noise of the steam vents out of the funnels, that no one could hear what was going on. And he shouted, "Shall I put the women and children into the boat, sir?" And Captain Smith says, "Yes, yes." And at this point, Margaret, Dr. Leader, and Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon were now on the deck of the Titanic. They had been woken by a steward earlier on, and they couldn't believe what was going on. They just couldn't imagine that the Titanic was going to go down. So the steward says to urge them to wear their life jackets, to dress warmly, and make their way up to the boat deck, as we can see. Now, you have to imagine everyone was in bed at this moment. So what did Margaret do? She had a nightgown on, and she had a pair of slippers and a jacket, and that's all she left the Titanic that night with. And here we can see this is Margaret's night dress that we very proudly display in the exhibition, that belonged to her, that was worn by her on the Titanic, and this was in fact on her person when she survived the worst maritime tragedy in history at the time. So Frederick Kenyon kissed his wife Marion and said his goodbyes. In lifeboat number 8, we are now being lowered into the dark, freezing cold ocean, as you can see here. And here we can see some of the occupants. Here we have Margaret, we have Marion, and we have Dr. Leader actually in lifeboat number 8. We're going to look at what happened later on. I mean, the Carpathia was 50 miles away under the command of Captain Arthur Henry Rostron. Now, he had a full complement of passengers that were on their way to the Mediterranean for a holiday, for a cruise. He travelled 58 miles, and it would take him almost 4 hours to get there. So arriving at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, an hour and a half after the Titanic has now gone down, the life expectancy in the Atlantic Ocean that evening was between 5 and 6 minutes to survive. So that was not a long time. So Captain Rostron knew the precarious situation that was happening. He aimed to get there as quick as he could. And when he did arrive, he was absolutely distraught with what he'd seen. There was no sign of the Titanic. There was no lifeboats to be seen. Then all of a sudden, he caught sight of a light. And yes, the lifeboat started to then come towards the Carpathia. The saviour, the Carpathia, was now there to rescue as many people as possible. And 705 survivors were saved thanks to this man, his ship and his crew. Incredible heroism that evening. It was incredible in the early hours of the morning, April 5th, 1912. Captain Rostron felt he could have done more, but my goodness, what an incredible man that did so much to save so many lives. Margaret could remember climbing up the rope ladder, as you can see, into the D-deck, the gangway doors here, on the side of the Carpathia. as did many of the passengers. Babies were hoisted up in canvas sacks. It was an incredible sight for those that were passengers on the Carpathia, at which they gave up their clothes to give to those who had survived. Because you've got to imagine that first class ladies, second class, even crew members that survived, and third class ladies and children that survived, they had nothing. Everything that they had went down with the Titanic. That's all they had left was the clothes they were wearing on their backs going onto the Carpathia. It was an incredible people helping one another and coming to their aid at a time of incredible need. After which time, the Carpathia's captain, Captain Rostron, decided that he would then leave the disaster area and head to New York City, which she did. As she enters New York with the survivors, and there's quite a very somber film, as you can imagine, the Carpathia, the ship carrying those that survived, and many of the women on board and children were in tears frantically, looking for their daddies, looking for husbands, looking for brothers, looking for sons that would sadly never arrive. It was such a sad loss of life. John Jacob Astor was the richest man on board the Titanic. He was one of the millionaires. At 1500 to 1800 dead, as this paper actually portrays, it was absolutely incredible. How could the ship, the unsinkable, it was absolutely unthinkable that this ship would go down on her maiden voyage with such an incredible amount loss of life. Well, Margaret went on to have an incredible life. After she arrived in New York, she was back home again. She was obviously traumatized with the Titanic disaster, and she was helping her friend Marion Kenyon as well, because she had lost her husband on the Titanic tragedy. So they knew exactly how one another had felt about losing a husband in such terrible circumstances and such suddenness. They were so heartbroken. She would then go on as a keen horticulturist. She was involved in many of the New York garden clubs, and she was president of many of them. She was helping to establish as much greatness in the country as possible. She actually campaigned for President Hoover during his campaign, his electoral campaign. She was a really incredible democratic woman who was so much behind votes for women. She changed so much in American history. It was unbelievable. This incredible woman fought for women's rights alongside the ladies you can see here, because she felt there had to be a change. And she was a real person to fight for rights and for what she believed in. And she was actually one of the ladies who was involved in turning over America to become giving women's votes and to give votes for the women, to give them that equality, which we all know, and it's quite rightly so, that women have today. As many people would say that when you would meet this lovely lady, she left an incredible sentimental feeling on you of a warm, kind, heart lady who was always willing of selflessness to go beyond anything to help another human being. And that is the great thing about this lovely lady. It's so proud to remain her legacy. And we're proud to have her nightgown in the exhibition, to portray that this is just not only a lady who was a Titanic survivor, but the history that she was involved with that changed women's rights for America as well. What an incredible woman she really was. And sadly, she passed away on the 29th of April, 1948, at the age of 86. She was finally at rest with her dearest husband, Fred. And she is laid to rest, as we can see here, at the family mausoleum, which is actually located in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in New York. We do hope that you have enjoyed the presentation today. We'd like to thank you for your time, and if we can be of any further assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us. We will be more than happy to help. Thank you. Hello and a very warm welcome to Titanic Honour and Glory, bringing history to life where the past is always present. It's a great privilege to welcome you to along this presentation. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about a true love story on board the HMS Titanic, that being love of the sea. So let's sit back and enjoy this fascinating and very intriguing talk. We're going to take a look at where it all began, and that is here in Foregate Street in Worcester. Now, the gentleman that you can see on the screen just now is Henry Samuel Morley. He was the owner of Morley's High Class Confectioners, and they had shops in Birmingham, Great Malvern, and here in Foregate Street in Worcestershire. It was a real thriving shop, and it was very popular with many of the school children across the Midlands. So here we have Henry Samuel Morley's shop in Foregate Street in Worcestershire, and we can see there's a lovely lady here. This is Kate Louise Phillips. Now, Kate Louise Phillips was a 19-year-old girl, and she actually was employed as a shop assistant in Morley's High Class Confectioners. Morley's was a favourite for all the school children. Many would come and go, and Henry would visit his shops very frequently to make sure that they're running very well. And it was here that he would catch up with Kate, and he would be asking her how things were going in the Foregate Street shop, especially, and to which she would reply that, many children are coming in and very, buying so many things from the shop. It was a very firm favourite for all the children in the Midlands. She was very much of a loving girl. She was very compassionate. She was very kind. She was very caring. And so much so, it showed in her way that she worked. She was very proud to welcome all those children, and she, on many occasions, would give them a little extra sweets and treats. Well, Henry Samuel Morley was actually visiting his shop, and that, this friendship would blossom. Then more, where a love would form. And actually, the two of them, Kate Louise Phillips and Henry, began to fall in love. Now, Henry was 20 years her senior, Kate was only 19 years old. So there was a big dramatic difference in the age. Now, the problem was that Henry was already married. So that again was going to cause a problem for them, because in Edwardian society, this was very much frowned upon. Nothing like this should ever happen. And it really was in society at the time. Really, it was looked on as a disgrace, to be honest with you. So we get an idea of what Henry Samuel Morley would do next. He was very close with his brother, who was a partner in the business as well. And as we can see, decisions had to be made. And that decision was made that Henry would take a share of his side of the company. So what he would ostensibly do is he would say to everyone that he was going away to recuperate from an illness that he was going through. He would go abroad. But in actual fact, he was actually planning to elope, to emigrate to America with his new love, Kate Louise Phillips. A token of his love for Kate, what he did was he went to the Birmingham Jewellery Quarter, where he purchased this beautiful and stunning sapphire and diamond necklace. Now, this necklace was purchased to take on to their voyage on the Titanic, and later for their new life in America. He was so devoted to this young girl, this 19-year-old beautiful woman, Kate, that he loved her so much, and he openly expressed this to her many occasions. So what happened was they boarded the Titanic under ticket number 250655 for a grand cost of £26. They boarded the Titanic under the assumed names of Mr. and Mrs. Marshall, because obviously at that time in Edwardian society, they were carrying a secret. They didn't want anyone else to know about it. So people on board the Titanic thought that they were actually a married couple, where in fact they weren't. So they carried the secret even on board the Titanic with them, travelling in second class. Second class was almost equivalent to first class in any other ocean liner at the time. That's how grand second class was on Titanic. In the cabin, they would have a cabin such as this one. And here we can see Kate and Henry enjoying their time on board, getting to know more about this beautiful ship, and also looking forward to their future. They're going to be going to San Francisco. That's where they're going to be immigrating to. They're going to be looking to start up a new life and a new business. Perhaps Henry was looking to start up a new life as a confectioner over there. It's what he was really dreaming about at the time. They would have a steward service, such as you can see on the screen just now, with a stewardess who would attend to Kate's every daily needs. So she must have felt like a queen on board the Titanic. The second class boat deck, very spacious and very grand. For a working class girl who was not accustomed to such grandeur as this must have felt an incredible experience and a life that lay ahead for her, promenading on the decks with her beloved Henry taking her arm. And in the second class dining room, what a sight to be seen. Beautiful chinaware serving succulent dishes, as you can see in this example menu from the Titanic. Steward service bringing every appetizing meal to your table. It was something unheard of in, in working society, especially for Kate coming from a working class background. And here you can see the sapphire and diamond necklace that Henry would give to Kate as a token of his love on Titanic's last night at sea, and how much she must have shone through the dining room as she entered that privileged world that evening, Sunday, April 14th, 1912. Their last night together would have been Sunday, April 14th, 1912. And it's important to remember that this was an incredible sunset that many actually took the time to view on deck. Perhaps after the service, the divine service with Reverend Ernest Carter, they would have went onto the boat deck like many other passengers did at the time and held one another and looked as the sunset was going down and the Titanic was sailing into her destiny. Disaster strikes. 11:40 p.m., April 14th, 1912. High up in the crow's nest, as we can see here, we have Fred Fleet. Now, Fred Fleet was looking ahead and he could see a huge bear coming to the starboard side of the Titanic. He rang that bell 3 times. "Iceberg right ahead," he shouted. All the bridge officers running around trying to turn the ship in time. Hard a starboard, full astern, close the watertight doors, hard a port. And sadly, in vain efforts failed. Titanic would sideswipe the iceberg and sadly sink to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean later in the morning on Monday, April 15th, 1912. The second class boat deck was absolute pandemonium. Many people were shouting. You couldn't be heard because of the steam that was belching from the steam pipes actually in the forward funnels. It was so deafening, the noise. The officers were frantically trying to get lifeboats launched. What must have been incredible for this young girl, 19-year-old Kate, actually on this boat deck, passing through the second class area, as you can see here, knowing that there's something dramatically wrong and something serious is wrong with the Titanic. So Henry takes Kate to the lifeboat and he takes her hand and he says to her, "Goodbye, my sweetheart." He tells her how much she was loved by him. And he gives her the sealskin purse with the cabin trunk keys in her possession. And all she has is a nightgown on, a jacket, and slippers. Unbelievable. And she looks at him in the eye and she knows there's something wrong. And in lifeboat number 11, as we can see, as the lifeboats are being rowed further away, she transfixed her eyes onto the place where she last seen her beloved Henry. But then she lost him in the crowds as the crowds and the panic began to occur in the Titanic's final moments. It's something that she would never forget. It's something that would traumatize her for the rest of her life, as she would hear the ship breaking apart, the screams, the chaos that was going on Titanic, and the ship breaking apart, and the hymn, "Nearer, My God, to Thee," being played by the heroic orchestra as the Titanic is sinking. Then a ship, their saviour, the Carpathia, is travelling 58 miles away under the command of Captain Arthur Henry Rostron. He was actually at full speed to get to the Titanic's position, a place where he would arrive 4 hours after the fateful collision, arriving at precisely 4 o'clock in the morning. So Titanic had now been sunk for over an hour and a half. The life expectancy was 5 to 6 minutes in the freezing cold Atlantic waters. Sadly, he would arrive just too late, as over 1,500 souls would perish on the Titanic. 705 survivors were all that were picked up by the Carpathia. thanks to this incredibly heroic man and his crew of the RMS Carpathia, Captain Arthur Henry Rostron. Captain Arthur Rostron then decides to take the Carpathia back to New York with the survivors on board. What an incredible journey this must have been, heartfelt. Many women and children were looking for husbands, looking for fathers, looking for brothers, trying to get as much information to see if they were coming on other ships, and sadly, they would never arrive. And for young Kate, it must have been soul destroying and so much of a heartbreak to realise that she had lost her beloved Henry. The sad loss of life was unbelievable. How this beautiful ship could sink on her maiden voyage was unthinkable. 1,500 to 1,800 dead were reported by the newspapers in New York. Newspaper boys all over Britain were standing shouting, "Read all about it, Titanic sunk." And yet, for Kate, the return to Britain was going to happen. She boarded the White Star liner Celtic that was chartered to bring the survivors back to England. And when she arrived, she didn't realise that she was going to have to face Britain again and to face the secret affair that they had. And this would now be known by many people in Worcestershire. Little did she know that she had actually fallen pregnant on board the Titanic. In actual fact, through the mid-Atlantic voyage, she had conceived a baby. And this beautiful baby would then be born in 1913. Her beautiful daughter, as she always said, just such a tragedy that Henry never had the opportunity to see his beautiful daughter. All that she had was the sealskin purse, her cabin trunk keys, and a necklace given to her by her beloved Henry when she returned to England. And for many years, Ellen Mary Walker campaigned and she pleaded to have her father recognised as her father, to have his name on her birth certificate. She would be a Titanic ambassador in many ways, attending conventions, going to exhibitions, and telling everyone her incredible, fascinating, and yet true story of the love of her mother and her father on board the Titanic. She was forever in the shadow of the Titanic. She would attend events, exhibitions, and many gatherings there with other Titanic survivors. She would sign postcards. She would be autographed in many books. And many years ago, she would say to me personally, "I just really want to be remembered as Henry's daughter." She had an incredible life. She worked for the British Passport Office with the government. And through that time, she actually became a witness to the notorious Cray twins during their upcoming trials. And because she testified against them, she was under witness protection, as she always laughed at the time to tell us her story. During World War II, she was in the London Underground and she helped to calm people by singing to them, relaxing them, keeping them calm as the German Luftwaffe bombed London during the Blitz. An incredible lady who had seen so much history throughout her life. And yet, her connection to the Titanic with her father, Henry Samuel Morley, was still to be recognised. Her life's only wish, as she put it, was to be recognised and have father unknown removed from her birth certificate, to then having Henry Samuel Morley recognised as her father. Sadly, this would never ever come. Sadly, Ellen would pass away in her care home in Worcester. And it was with great regret that such a loving lady who was so caring and so much always happy to see other people happy, she never was granted her wish, that being her father being recognised. One wish that she did have was to be reunited with her father, and that actually happened. One wish that was granted. After her funeral service, Her ashes were scattered at sea, as close to the North Atlantic as possible, just off Cornwall. And here we can see a beautiful service taken on board the Royal National Lifeboat. And here we can imagine that scene, the sadness, but yet of a happy ending, where she was finally reunited with her father after many long years. We do hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. We'd like to thank you, and if you have any questions or if we can be of any further assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me. We'll be more than happy to help. Thank you very much.